Sarah Martinez had always prided herself on being a reasonable neighbor. In her 12 years living on Maple Street, she helped elderly Mrs. Peterson with her groceries, had loaned tools to the Johnsons next door, and had even organized the annual block party that brought everyone together each summer. But as she stood at her kitchen window on that crisp October morning, watching her new neighbor Brenda Walsh climb out of her silver BMW and walk away without a care in the world, Sarah felt her patience snap like a twig. For the third time that week, Brenda had parked her car directly across Sarah's driveway. Not partially blocking it, not accidentally encroaching by a few inches, completely deliberately and unapologetically blocking the entire entrance to Sarah's property. Sarah pressed her forehead against the cool glass, her breath fogging the window as she stared at the gleaming BMW that might as well have been a prison gate. She was already running late for her job at the elementary school where she taught 4th grade, and now she was trapped in her own home by someone who had moved in just 6 weeks ago and already acted like she owned the entire neighborhood. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that Brenda had a perfectly good driveway of her own, a wide, pristine concrete strip that could easily fit 3 cars. But instead of using it, Brenda consistently chose to park on the street, always managing to position her vehicle in the exact spot that would cause maximum inconvenience to Sarah. "This has to be intentional," Sarah muttered, grabbing her phone from the counter. She scrolled through her contacts until she found Brenda's number, which she reluctantly saved after their first neighborly introduction. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Brenda. I'm probably out living my best life, so leave a message and I'll get back to you eventually." The sickeningly cheerful voice made Sarah's jaw clench. "Brenda, it's Sarah from next door. Your car is blocking my driveway again and I really need to get to work. Could you please move it? This is the 3rd time this week and The voicemail cut her off with a harsh beep. Sarah tried calling twice more, each attempt going straight to voicemail. By now, she was 15 minutes late, and her principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, was notoriously strict about punctuality. There was no choice but to walk the 6 blocks to school, her heels clicking angrily against the sidewalk with each step. When she finally returned home that afternoon, exhausted from dealing with 28 energetic 9-year-olds and the stress of explaining her tardiness, the BMW was gone. But Sarah's relief was short-lived. The next morning, like clockwork, there it was again, gleaming silver and smugly blocking her escape route to freedom. This time, Sarah didn't bother calling. She could see Brenda through her living room window, casually sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone, clearly aware of what she'd done. Instead, Sarah grabbed a notepad and marched outside, her anger fueling each determined step. She wrote in large, clear letters, "Please do not kick my drive. I need access to work. Thank you." She placed the note under Brenda's windshield wiper, weighing it down with a small rock to prevent it from blowing away. By Friday, Sarah had left 4 notes. Not one had been acknowledged, and Brenda continued her daily ritual of automotive terrorism with increasing boldness. What started as a parking problem was rapidly becoming a war of wills, and Sarah was beginning to realize that her reasonable approach wasn't going to work with someone who seemed to take pleasure in other people's misery. The weekend brought Sarah temporary relief, but Monday morning arrived with the familiar sight of the silver BMW planted across her driveway like a metallic middle finger. This time, however, Sarah was prepared. She had spent her weekend researching her options, and armed with a notebook full of phone numbers and regulations, she was ready to fight fire with fire. Her first call was to the Homeowners Association. Margaret Chen, the HOA president, listened patiently as Sarah explained the situation in measured, professional tones. "I understand your frustration, Sarah," Margaret said, her voice carrying the weariness of someone who'd mediated countless neighbor disputes. "But technically, street parking isn't under HOA jurisdiction. The city manages that. Have you tried talking to her directly?" "Multiple times," Sarah replied, watching through her window as Brenda emerged from her house wearing designer workout clothes, clearly heading to her morning yoga class while Sarah remained trapped. "She doesn't respond to calls, texts, or notes." "Well, you can file a formal complaint with the city's Parking Enforcement Division. They handle driveway blocking violations." Sarah's heart lifted. Finally, a real solution. "What's the process?" "You'll need to document each incident with photos, times, and dates, then file a written complaint. They'll investigate within 7 to 10 business days and issue a citation if they find a violation." 7 to 10 business days, Sarah's hope deflated like a punctured balloon. "So I'm supposed to be late to work for 2 weeks while they investigate something that's happening right now." "I'm sorry, Sarah. That's just how the system works." After hanging up, Sarah immediately called the non-emergency police line. Officer Rodriguez sounded sympathetic, but equally unhelpful. "Ma'am, unless the vehicle has been parked there for more than 72 hours, or unless it's an emergency situation preventing access for emergency vehicles, this falls under civil parking enforcement, not criminal law. But I can't get to work. Sarah's voice cracked with frustration. Have you considered calling a tow truck? Sarah's pulse quickened. Can I do that? Only if it's your property being blocked. But you need to post proper signage warning about towing, and the signs have to be up for at least 24 hours before you can legally tow. Also, you'll need to pay the towing fee up front, then you can sue for reimbursement later. More bureaucracy, more waiting. More money out of her own pocket to solve a problem she didn't create. By Wednesday, Sarah had filed her formal complaint with the city, complete with timestamp photos of Brenda's car blocking her driveway on 6 separate occasions. She had also ordered a no parking. Violators will be towed sign from an online supplier, though it wouldn't arrive for another 3 days. Meanwhile, Brenda seemed to sense Sarah's escalating efforts and responded by doubling down. On Thursday morning, she didn't just block the driveway. She parked at an angle that also partially blocked the sidewalk, forcing joggers and dog walkers to step into the street to get around her car. That afternoon, Sarah watched from her kitchen window as Brenda returned home, checked her windshield for any new notes, and then looked directly at Sarah's house with a smirk that could have curdled milk. The message was clear. I know exactly what I'm doing, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. Sarah's phone rang. It was her principal, Mrs. Rodriguez. Sarah, I need to discuss your recent tardiness. This is the 5th time in 2 weeks, and it's starting to affect your classroom preparation time. Sarah's stomach dropped. Her teaching career, something she'd worked 15 years to build, was now at risk because of her neighbor's petty cruelty. As she explained the situation to her principal, she realized that all the proper channels, all the rules and regulations designed to protect people like her, were failing spectacularly. The system worked for people who played by the rules, but Brenda Walsh clearly operated by a different set of principles entirely. The towing sign arrived on Friday, and Sarah installed it immediately, positioning it clearly visible at the entrance to her driveway. She felt a surge of satisfaction as she tightened the final bolt. Finally, she had a weapon in this increasingly one-sided war. Monday morning brought fresh disappointment. Not only was Brenda's BMW parked in its usual spot, but now a second car. A red Honda that Sarah didn't recognize sat beside it, creating an impenetrable wall across both her driveway and half of her front yard. Sarah stared in disbelief. Brenda had recruited reinforcements. The Honda belonged to Brenda's boyfriend, Kyle, a muscle-bound 20-something who looked like he'd stepped out of a gym supplement advertisement. Sarah watched through her blinds as he and Brenda stood in front of her house, pointing at her towing sign and laughing. Actually laughing. Brenda pulled out her phone and took a selfie with the sign in the background, both of them grinning like they'd just won the lottery. Sarah's hands shook as she called the towing company. We can't tow from a public street, the dispatcher explained patiently. Your sign only applies to your private property. The cars are technically parked on city property. But they're blocking my driveway. That's a city enforcement issue. You'll need to call parking violations. Sarah had already been down this road. The city's response would take days if it came at all. Meanwhile, her job hung in the balance, and Brenda was treating her misery like entertainment. That afternoon, things got worse. Sarah returned from another humiliating walk to school to find a note tucked under her door. Written in Brenda's flowery handwriting, it read, Dear Sarah, thanks for the adorable sign. Kyle and I think it really adds character to the neighborhood. XOXO Brenda. P.S. Maybe try Uber. The casual cruelty of it took Sarah's breath away. This wasn't just about parking anymore. This was psychological warfare, and Sarah was losing badly. Over the next week, Brenda's campaign intensified. She began timing her departures to coincide with Sarah's morning routine, making sure Sarah could see her leisurely stroll to her car, while Sarah stood trapped behind her kitchen window. She started parking even closer to Sarah's property line, her bumper now practically kissing the edge of Sarah's driveway. Most infuriatingly, she began bringing friends over specifically to show them her hilarious neighbor situation, turning Sarah's daily torment into a spectacle for her entertainment. The breaking point came on Thursday evening. Sarah had just returned from a particularly difficult parent-teacher conference when she saw them. Brenda, Kyle, and 3 other people standing in front of her house, drinks in hand, posing for photos with her towing sign. One of them was pretending to be terrified, hands raised in mock surrender, while the others laughed and snapped pictures. They were having a party, at her expense, on her property. Sarah stepped out of her car, her whole body trembling with rage she never felt before. Excuse me, she called out, her voice surprisingly steady. You're on my property. Brenda turned, her smile widening. Oh, hi, Sarah. We were just admiring your adorable little sign. It's so aggressive. Very unlike you. I need you to leave. Now. Or what? Kyle stepped forward, puffing out his chest. You call the cops? We're not doing anything illegal. Sarah looked at the group of them, young and titled, treating her pain like a joke, and something inside her crystallized. She tried being reasonable. She tried working within the system. She tried appealing to their basic human decency. All of it failed because she was dealing with people who had no decency to appeal to. "You're right," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying a new edge that made Brenda's smile falter slightly. "You're not doing anything illegal. Yet." She turned and walked into her house, leaving them standing on her lawn, suddenly uncertain. As she closed the door behind her, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: control. For the first time since this nightmare began, she wasn't reacting to Brenda's moves. She was planning her own. Sarah spent that entire evening at her computer, researching with the methodical precision that had made her an excellent teacher. If Brenda wanted to play games, Sarah would show her what a real strategist could accomplish. By midnight, she had a plan that was both perfectly legal and absolutely devastating. The next morning, Sarah made 3 phone calls before Brenda even woke up. First, she called Dave Peterson, Mrs. Peterson's grandson who ran a landscaping business. "Dave, I need a favor. Can you have one of your trucks parked on Maple Street tomorrow morning? I'll pay you for the time." Second, she called her friend Maria, who worked for a medical equipment rental company. "Maria, remember how you always said you owed me for helping with your son's science project? I need to borrow a wheelchair-accessible van for the weekend." Third, and most importantly, she called the city's permit office. "I'd like to apply for a temporary construction permit for my property. Yes, I understand the truck will need street access. 24 hours should be sufficient." Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear. Sarah was up before dawn, positioning herself at her kitchen window with a cup of coffee and her phone. At exactly 7 a.m., Dave's landscaping truck rumbled down Maple Street, a massive vehicle towing a trailer full of equipment. Behind it came Maria in the medical van, followed by 2 more vehicles that Sarah had strategically arranged: her teacher friend Janet's minivan, borrowed under the pretense of helping move classroom supplies, and her neighbor Tom's pickup truck. Tom was happy to help after hearing about Sarah's parking situation. By 7:15, every legal parking spot on both sides of Maple Street was occupied by Sarah's allies. At 7:30, Brenda emerged for her usual morning routine, coffee in hand, designer workout clothes perfectly coordinated. She stopped dead in her tracks. There was absolutely nowhere to park her BMW except in her own driveway. Sarah watched through her window as Brenda circled the block 3 times, growing more agitated with each pass. Finally, she parked in her own driveway, exactly where she should have been parking all along, and stomped to Sarah's front door. "This is ridiculous," Brenda shouted when Sarah answered, not bothering with pleasantries. "You can't just have people take up all the parking." "Actually, I can," Sarah replied calmly, holding up her city permit. "I have a legitimate construction project starting Monday, and these vehicles are here legally. They're not blocking anyone's driveway." "This is harassment." "Is it? Because for 6 weeks, you've been blocking my driveway daily, forcing me to walk to work, putting my job at risk and turning my situation into entertainment for your friends. But when I legally arrange for vehicles to use public parking spaces, suddenly that's harassment." Brenda's face flushed red. "I'll call the police." "Please do. I have permits, documentation, and witnesses." "Do you?" For the first time since this ordeal began, Brenda was speechless. But Sarah wasn't finished. Phase 2 of her plan activated at noon, when the weekend really hit its stride. She had carefully researched the city's noise ordinances and discovered that construction work was permitted until 6 p.m. on weekends. At exactly 12:01 p.m., Dave's crew began what appeared to be legitimate landscaping work on Sarah's front yard, work that required heavy machinery, backup beepers, and considerable discussion conducted at normal volume right next to Brenda's bedroom window. Meanwhile, Sarah had arranged for her friend's teenager to practice drums in her garage, something that was perfectly legal during daytime hours and actually quite pleasant to listen to unless you were trying to sleep in after a late night of partying. By Sunday, Brenda looked haggard. The constant activity, the lack of convenient parking, and the realization that Sarah had outmaneuvered her using nothing but research and community connections had clearly taken a toll. Kyle hadn't been seen since Saturday morning, apparently deciding that this particular drama wasn't worth his time. But Sarah's masterstroke was yet to come. On Sunday evening, she posted a detailed account of the past 6 weeks on the neighborhood Facebook group, complete with photos, timestamps, and documentation of every attempt she'd made to resolve this situation reasonably. She didn't embellish or exaggerate. She simply presented the facts, ending with, "I want to thank everyone who helped me this weekend show Ms. Walsh how inconvenient it can be when someone blocks your normal routine. I hope we can all return to being good neighbors now." The post went viral within the neighborhood. By Monday morning, it had been shared 47 times and had generated 156 comments, most of them expressing support for Sarah, and Monday morning brought the sweetest sight Sarah had seen in 2 months. Her driveway was completely clear. Not only was Brenda's BMW parked in its rightful place in Brenda's own driveway, but it remained there for the entire week. The transformation was immediate and total. Brenda, who had once strutted around the neighborhood like she owned it, now scurried from her car to her house with her head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The social media post had done more than expose her behavior. It had made her a pariah in her own neighborhood. The real consequences began piling up quickly. Margaret Chen from the HOA called Sarah on Tuesday with an update. "I wanted to let you know that we've received several complaints about Ms. Walsh beyond just the parking issue," Margaret said, her tone significantly warmer than their previous conversation. Apparently, she's been putting her trash out 3 days early, letting her dog run loose without a leash and playing loud music late into the night. "We're initiating a formal review of her tenancy agreement." It turned out that Brenda wasn't even an owner. She was renting the house, and her lease had a strict clause about disturbing neighbors. Her landlord, Mr. Henderson, had seen the Facebook post and was not pleased about his property being associated with neighborhood drama. Wednesday brought even better news. Officer Rodriguez called to inform Sarah that the city had finally processed her parking complaint and would be issuing citations for the documented violations. More importantly, they were designating her block for increased patrol monitoring after several other residents came forward with similar complaints about Brenda's parking habits. But the most satisfying moment came on Thursday evening. Sarah was watering her newly landscaped front garden when she heard voices from next door. Through Brenda's open window, she could hear a heated phone conversation. "No, Mom, I can't just move back home," Brenda was saying, her voice strained and defensive. "It's complicated. Yes, I know what the Facebook post said. No, I don't think I was being unreasonable. Fine, maybe I'll look for somewhere else to live." Friday afternoon, Sarah watched from her kitchen window as a moving truck pulled up to Brenda's house. Kyle was nowhere to be seen, but several of Brenda's friends who had participated in the mocking party were there quietly helping to load boxes. The atmosphere was subdued, completely different from the arrogant celebration they'd held just 2 weeks earlier. As Brenda supervised the loading of her BMW onto a car carrier, she glanced towards Sarah's house. For a brief moment, their eyes met through the window. Sarah didn't gloat or wave. She simply nodded, one member acknowledging another. Brenda looked away quickly, her face flushed with what Sarah hoped was shame. The moving truck pulled away just as Sarah's husband, Mark, returned from his business trip. He surveyed the peaceful street, the clear driveway, and his wife's satisfied expression. "So," he said, wrapping his arms around her, "I take it you handled the parking situation while I was gone." Sarah smiled, watching the last of Brenda's belongings disappear around the corner. "Let's just say I reminded someone that actions have consequences. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire, but you can do it without getting burned if you're smart about it." The new neighbors who moved in 3 weeks later were a retired couple from Minnesota who brought homemade cookies as an introduction and parked exclusively in their own driveway. Sarah's commute returned to its peaceful 10-minute drive, her job performance recovered completely, and she never had to leave another note on anyone's windshield. More importantly, word of Sarah's strategic victory spread throughout the neighborhood and beyond. She became something of a local legend, the mild-mannered teacher who had outsmarted a bully using nothing but intelligence, community support, and perfect legal maneuvering. Other neighbors began coming to her for advice when they faced their own difficult situations, and Sarah discovered she had a real talent for creative problem-solving. 6 months later, Margaret Chen approached Sarah about running for HOA president. "We need someone who knows how to handle difficult situations with grace and effectiveness," Margaret explained. "Someone who understands that sometimes the best way to deal with unreasonable people is to show them what reasonable people can accomplish when they work together." Sarah had accepted the nomination. After all, she learned that the best revenge isn't getting even. It's showing someone that their petty cruelty only makes you stronger, smarter, and more connected to the community they tried to disrupt. Brenda Walsh had unknowingly given Sarah the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that she was far more resourceful and resilient than she'd ever imagined.